Hey guys, I'm Tom on Tech Chat, and I'm filming this entire review on the new iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. So let me know what you make of it. Does it look like it's been shot on iPhone? And actually, if I show you what I'm looking at, you can see this is my producer James with the 15 Pro recording his new 4K 60 ProRes onto an SSD plugged into the USB port. So for me, actually, the new USB-C port is incredibly helpful because I can transfer files off. We're talking like 10 gigs per minute at 4K 60 ProRes, plug it in your laptop, and away you go. But as well as being able to shoot 4K 60 ProRes for the first time on the new iPhone 15 Pros, you can also now record in HDR and log. Now, I still don't think an iPhone is going to replace your fancy mirrorless or DSLR camera, but you know, often the best camera is the one you have in your pocket. It's a good tool to have, although I would be kind of surprised if my, I don't know, professional wedding videographer turned up to my wedding shooting on an iPhone. But with the new options you have, with the higher quality video and photos, which we'll come back to in a second, oh, that just got bright. It's a pretty big step up. Anyway, enough about ProRes. The headline upgrade with the new 15 series is the switch to USB-C. The ubiquity, the universality of USB-C, how every MacBook, iPad, well, except the cheapest 9th gen model, every Windows laptop, Android phone, and every charging port in new cars, they're all Type-C. And while you could faff around with adapters or just rely on wireless charging and AirDrop, going forward, it means if you run out of battery on your iPhone 15 and your friends are on Android, then you can use the same charging cable, and vice versa. Now, I had hoped the switch to USB-C may have meant we'd also get faster charging, but alas no, still tops out at 20 watts with Apple's charger, which of course doesn't come bundled in the box, although you do get the nice C2C braided cable now, and also the regular 15s, not the Pros, actually have a USB 2.0 spec rather than 3.0, so the same speed as the old Lightning connector. So it feels like a little half-hearted sort of switch to USB-C, although there are other benefits. Obviously we've got this transfer of footage that I'm recording ProRes on right now. Also, you can now output to a TV or monitor at 4K 60 HDR, previously topped out at 1080p 30, although I'm not sure if Apple made this switch out of the pure goodness of their heart, so everything could be universal and lovely. I think it had something to do with the EU regulations coming in next year, which kind of forced them to switch to USB-C if they wanted to keep selling these phones in Europe. But regardless of why they did it, it is certainly a nice upgrade. It will take a minute for Apple's accessories to catch up. Only the AirPods Pro 2 have been refreshed with a USB-C case. All other AirPods, the Maxes, Apple's power bank, and obviously still their Mac peripherals all need updating. But I suspect that will happen pretty quickly. And I'm also excited by all the new third-party accessories and chargers coming out that will work with, well, everything. But there's a lot more here than just USB-C and some fancy video options. Although I'll come back to the camera in just a second. Let's talk about this design. And while on the face of it, not a whole lot has changed in the last, well, 4 years, I guess, since the iPhone 11 Pro, with the most obvious refresh being last year's Dynamic Island, which I'm pleased to see has made its way to the regular iPhone 15s now, and it is a genuinely useful little notification bar, especially as more apps have now been optimized to use it. I'll tell you what though, the first thing you notice, how much lighter this is. The 15 Pros have a new titanium band around the edge, and together with an aluminium frame inside, actually reduces the weight by 19 grams. 240, 221, and particularly with the Pro Max, which is a pretty chunky phone, it is a very welcome upgrade. They've also slimmed down the bezels, and it means they've been able to reduce the overall size of the phone. It's almost a millimeter narrower and shorter, although it is about half a millimeter thicker, but they've maintained the same 6.1 and 6.7 inch screen sizes. Apple have also slightly contoured just the corners of the frame here on the back, so it's a little bit smoother and sits in your hand a bit more comfortably, although it is quite subtle. And as someone who used the 14 Pro Max as their main phone for most of last year, these changes do add up to make it just a little bit more comfortable to use. We also get a couple of new colors. This is the natural titanium, which for my money, I think is the best new flavor. It's kind of this sort of stony grayish color. We also get a dark blue, a black, and a white. Although more importantly, they've actually redesigned the internal frame and layout of the 15 Pros, so the back glass can now be repaired much more easily, and crucially much more cheaply than before. I've also just realized this is going to be my 1000th video on YouTube. We're at 999, this is my next video. Holy moly, 1,000 videos. If you haven't already subscribed, I feel like now is a pretty good time. Let's see what happens over the next 1,000 videos. I'm gonna be so old. Anyway, back to the iPhone, and let's talk about this action button. It is still a mute switch by default. You just long press it to change between loud and silent, and the Dynamic Island will also react to the change. And if you are muted, you'll also be able to see the icon at the top left of the screen. But now you can customize it to do pretty much anything. Torch, voice recording, launch an app, although I reckon for most of us, myself included, you'll just make it the shortcut for the camera. And then it also acts as a shutter button. Yes, the volume down does also work as a shutter, but you can do anything with it really. And I also appreciate that you can use this to toggle on or off a lot of accessibility settings. I think for some people, this will be a really big deal.
Don't get too close to me when I'm cooking, babe.
I'm playing a preview of Resident Evil Village using what I'm told are PS4 assets natively on the 15 Pro Max, albeit at 720p and 30 FPS and, well, low to medium settings. But still, for a phone, this is incredible. And for now at least, it's only possible with the new Apple A17 Pro chip that powers the new 15 Pro and Pro Max, which also happens to be the first 3nm architecture chip we've had on a mobile. We're also going to have the likes of Resident Evil 4 Remake, Death Stranding, The Division Resurgence, and even next year Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is the first time a full console version of an Assassin's game will be on mobile. Definitely recommend a controller though. This is the Backbone 1 for PlayStation/Android, although they do now sell an iOS USB-C version for the iPhone 15. Highly recommend because playing Resident Evil Village with the virtual touchscreen controls isn't ideal. So it's all pretty exciting because yes, we have the usual 10% bump in processor performance, we actually get double the neural engine performance, but these are kind of just abstract upgrades that we see year on year and rarely make a noticeable difference. But the reason the A17 Pro is called the Pro is because of this completely redesigned graphics chip, the GPU, which is not only a lot more powerful, but supports features like hardware ray tracing. Which isn't new, you're right. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, the flagship Dimensity 9200, I believe it is, from MediaTek, they both support hardware ray tracing. Actually, we're going to have new versions of both those chips like next month, so they will compete with the A17 Pro. Hopefully it means more developers will actually make use of it in their games. Now, as strong as these new titanium frame phones are, they can still break. They can still fall out of your pocket, off tables. So I've teamed up with the lovely folks over at Casetify who have sent me a whole range of new cases to protect my iPhones. So Casetify have refreshed their lineup for the new iPhone 15 and 15 Pros, and I've got 3 of the most popular models here. I've got the Impact, the Bounce, and their brand new Ultra Bounce, each tougher than the last. And in case you're wondering, yeah, my real name is Tom, and not the tech chap. And what I really do like about Casetify is how they combine the creativity and the personality of their cases. I mean, there are literally so many options to choose from, and you can customize your own with proper, tough protection. In fact, all Casetify protective cases are lined with their Eco Shock material, which increases protection and also makes them able to absorb more of the shock if you happen to be a little bit clumsy and knock your phone off your desk over and over and over again. And actually, the Impact case meets the 4X military grade. We get 5X on the Ultra Impact, 6 on the Bounce, and a whopping 10X on the Ultra Bounce, which is the strongest case they have ever created, and it also has a built-in lens protector for the camera. You can literally drop this thing from over 30 feet, and maybe I will, but I'll save that for my next video. Just make sure you pair a Casetify case with a screen protector though, because even if your phone survives a fall, you don't want that screen to be scratched. So they're tough, they look good, and Casetify are making their products even more sustainable and environmentally friendly than ever. So before your shiny new iPhone arrives, click my link in the description below to get 15% off your next order at Casetify. Now versus last year's 14 Pros, the new 15 Pro and Pro Max get an extra 2 gigs of RAM, so we're now up to 8 GB, and of course we have that new A17 Pro chip replacing the A16 Bionic, and in this 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme test, we're looking at around a 25% uptick in performance. Although in this new Solar Bay benchmark, which includes ray tracing, it's 44% faster. However, if we switch back but run the 20-minute stress test, the stability is lower. The new chip throttles more, although it's still 8% faster even at its lowest score. But you can also see the 15 Pro Max lost 5% of its battery versus just 2% on the 14 Pro Max during this test, although we'll talk more about battery in just a second. But actually, even versus last year's 14 Pro Max, which as I say I've been using pretty much every day, this does feel noticeably nippier, more responsive. Apps seem to load just a touch quicker, and also I haven't had any of those sort of random slowdowns or stutters that did occasionally crop up on my 14 Pro. It's also a big deal because the 15 Pros are the only phones, for now at least, that will run these upcoming console-level games. This does now support Wi-Fi 6E, although you will of course need a compatible 6E router to make best use of it. But overall, I would say it's a solid step up, and with the new graphics chip along with USB-C, it makes this one of the most future-proof iPhones we've had in years. Okay, before we dive into the camera, which I know you're waiting to see, I just want to mention the battery life. Because we didn't see the much rumored increase in battery size, but for the first time, the 15 support the Qi 2 standard. So if you have a new Qi 2 wireless charger or power bank, that can now match the MagSafe's 15 watts, double the previous 7.5, which is a nice little upgrade. And actually, even though Apple claim the new 15 series will have the same battery as the 14 series, that's not been quite my experience so far. After an hour of YouTube, an hour of TikTok, half an hour of gaming, and 15 minutes of shooting 4K 60, both the 15 Pro and Pro Max were 3 percentage points lower than the 14 Pro and Pro Max. All phones with 100% battery capacity, and I actually bought these two 14 Pros last week, so they're all brand new like the 15s. Although more importantly, what I'm very keen to see is how the battery health fares over time, because my iPhone 14 Pro Max, which I've been using for a year, is down to 88% of its battery health. Now to be fair, other brands don't really share that information, so there's not a lot to compare it to, but I do know versus previous iPhones I've used for a long time, that degradation in battery capacity is a lot faster, is more significant. So I'm hoping there's improvements with this. Obviously, it'll take a while to figure that out. Let's just try and get a photo. No more, I'm out. If I bring up the camera specs for both, you can see the main hardware change this year is that the optical zoom with the Pro Max is getting a new 5x telephoto, whereas the Pro is sticking with 3x. Aside from that, the hardware is pretty similar. Same sensors and same resolutions as last year's 14 Pros. However, there is more to the story with some pretty big software and processing improvements. For example, the iPhone 15 Pros now combine your usual 4:1 pixel binned 12 megapixel photo with a full fat 48 megapixel photo, giving us a more detailed 24 megapixel shot. And also, despite having double the megapixels, the file size of each photo is only about 50% bigger. Apple have also introduced 3 different focal length options for the main camera. So you've got the default 1x, which is 24mm, tap once for 28, and tap again for 35, equivalent to a 1, 1.2, and 1.5x optical zoom, using some clever cropping of that 48 megapixel sensor. This is definitely aimed at more enthusiast photographers who have a particular focal length in mind, although it's a shame these new focal length options don't transfer over to video. But I reckon one of the most exciting new features is how even in the regular photo mode, if the camera detects a face, a cat or a dog, or even if you just simply tap on a subject, it will now capture a depth map, so you can actually turn this regular photo into a portrait, where you can then adjust the bokeh level and also the focal point. So if you see this little f-stop icon pop up, then you know it's capturing the portrait info, and you can tap it if you want to preview that bokeh. And then if you press edit on the photo, there is this new portrait button that turns it into a portrait with that tasty background blur. So the idea is you don't have to worry about whether I should take a regular photo or a portrait, which previously had higher shutter lag and missed out on smart HDR, because now with these next generation portraits, as Apple calls it, portraits now use the same photonic engine pipeline, so their fancy background processing, as a regular photo. So there's no compromise in quality or shutter lag. And for me, this is one of the most significant camera upgrades this year. Night mode shots, as well as the new portraits, also benefit from Apple's fancy photonic engine and deep fusion processing now, and according to Apple, we're looking at up to 2 times better low light quality. And their latest smart HDR5 processing should improve dynamic range, color, and detail across all cameras and modes. Up front, we have the same 12 megapixel true depth selfie camera as before, but this also gets next-gen portraits, so again, your regular selfies can now be turned into portraits after the fact, plus we get all the benefits of that new smart HDR5. As for video, the main difference now is that you can shoot that ProRes at 4K 60, we have new log and HDR options, and the video quality, particularly in low light, should be improved. Now usually the selfie camera gets forgotten in many phones, but not so much with the iPhone, and also not so much with video. And actually this can also shoot at 4K 60, also now in ProRes with log and HDR. Yes, it's lower megapixel than the rear camera, but it has pretty much all the same features, as well as smart HDR and the next-gen portraits for photos. So all that sounds great, but is the camera quality really that much better than last year? Well, let me show you a few side-by-sides, and also make sure you have subscribed, as I have a full camera comparison with the Galaxy S23 Ultra in the works. But my takeaway is that there isn't a huge amount in it. I think the most obvious change is how the 15 Pros lean towards a warmer white balance, which I would say is a little bit more accurate. Some shots are also noticeably less over-sharpened. Some photos on the 14s look like someone's just turned the clarity slider up in Lightroom too far. Now photos look more natural. And actually, if we crop in, so just literally pinch in on that one-time shot, you can see there is more detail, and that's thanks to the new 48 plus 12 megapixel combined shot. Although on the face of it, you may be hard-pressed to notice. Now, to answer the question of, is the 15 Pro Max's zoom better than the Pros? Well, it comes down to what you want, really. So between 1 and 2.9 times zoom, they're basically the same. Between 3 and 4.9, the Pro wins, but then 5 to 25 times, the Pro Max wins. Makes sense given the hardware. And of course, in an ideal world, we'd see the Pro Max with 4 lenses, like the S23 Ultra, so there isn't a compromise. But the question is, do you prefer a 3x portrait or a 5x portrait? 84mm or 120? You can obviously shoot both on both phones, although the quality isn't going to be the same, and the real world difference with the Pro Max is that you just have to take 2 or 3 steps back. What you can now do, as my cameraman James is demonstrating, is jump between all the different lenses while shooting at 4K 60. Previously, you couldn't go to ultra wide or telephoto, depending on which one you started with, but now at that highest resolution and frame rate, you can switch between them all. And I'm kind of curious how it looks going between those lenses, just darting in and out. Obviously, I can't see, but hopefully you'll let me know in the comments. What do you think? How's that 5x stability? Although I had hoped they'd have made some changes and upgrades to the cinematic mode, still stuck to 4K 30, no ProRes or log options. It still looks pretty good, particularly in nice lighting, but there is no kind of new next-gen mode of cinematic where if you shoot regular video, you can then add depth stuff afterwards, maybe next year. I'm also pleased to see that they have slightly reduced the lens flare. It's definitely still there, and we get those sort of light floaters, as I call them, but in this particular shot, you can no longer see the camera lens outline. But what do you think of this new camera system? Would it tempt you to upgrade? Another upgrade is actually the price. It's now cheaper, or at least here in the UK. Apple always set their prices by US dollars first and then look at other currencies and adjust for inflation and tax and things. But the iPhone 15, the regular one, is actually £50 cheaper now in the UK, starting at $799, down from $849. The 15 Pro is £100 cheaper, is now starting at $999 rather than $1099. And the 15 Pro Max is actually the same price, $1199, but now with 256 gigs of storage. Anyway, let's wrap up this review. Should you buy a 15 Pro and Pro Max? Well, it all depends if you do an upgrade. How old is your current phone? I reckon anyone with an iPhone 11 or older, yes, go for it. In terms of the Pro versus the Pro Max, for me, it comes down to the bigger battery. That's why I want this guy. And also I prefer the bigger screen, which is actually now a lot more comfortable to use because of the sort of smaller form factor. But I reckon even if as a package, it's not that significantly different from 14 Pro Max, there are lots of nice incremental upgrades. And as I say, with the Pro GPU, with USB-C, this is kind of like the new baseline for iPhones. If you buy anything older without USB-C, you're kind of restricted to last gen stuff. But what do you reckon? Are you tempted to upgrade? Have you already ordered one? Let me know what you make of the new 15 Pros in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chat.